Hello, World Civ students. This is, I think, part one of three sections we'll do on China that we'll get into today. And then probably, what's the right way to look at this? Probably Monday, today being Thursday, Monday we'll do the next one. Wednesday we'll do the next one. Next Friday, I want to give, my thought is probably plan on having, try to say this. Plan on having the review next Friday, rather, in which we do the review module and we cover the information for China and Russia. And remember, similar to the first unit test, very similar, like not a lot of change. Whatever we cover that day is going to be very similar to the test we gave out on May 4th. May the 4th be with you. Ha ha ha. I have to say, some of our due dates recently have been not by design, but like interesting dates. I'll leave it at that. You can read between the lines. But May 4th is the next due date, if you will, for a test and for the notes. I've had some people turn in notes for Russia. I mean, that's fine, but I don't need them now. I need the notes for all of Unit 2 when we actually have to turn it in on May 4th, right? So make sure you're aware of that. Just hold on to the Russia and then now the China notes, and you'll submit them on May 4th. Okay, so that's how it works for the next little bit. Yeah, today, Monday, Wednesday, those will be the video uploads. The next Friday, we'll have the review. And then May 4th, I'll send out the test. And then by 11:59 Seneca p.m., thank you again, you'll do the test and turn that back in via email and send in also your Unit 2 notes, Russia and China. So I hope that helps. I hope that explains sort of our scope and sequence for the next little bit. And and we'll go from there. And then we'll do our last unit, Unit 3, before the end of the school year. Okay, so on your guided notes for China, you should have, one, two, three. I think it's like 3 things or 3 pages of notes, 2 physical pages, 3 digital pages, and at the top of the notes, just in the margins, you guys know the routine. We'll write down a couple leaders' names that could be, hint, 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 important for the test, that you want to be able to name drop and so forth. All right, this first guy that we're going to talk about is Mao, M-A-O. Now, mind you, Mandarin, Cantonese, or at least Chinese, as you might know, Mandarin more so as mainland Chinese language. There are different dialects. Each province or area has its own dialect, more or less. But one good benefit of the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, is that they have helped formalize language. In such a big country with so many people, all the different dialects, they did have an understanding in education that Mandarin, sort of what Mrs. Doan teaches, is spoken on mainland China, spoken in Taiwan as well, which we'll talk about a little bit next time. But as I Romanize these words for you, their alphabet, right, symbolic alphabet, is different than what we have. They have symbols in terms of their written language. Very difficult for us to master and learn. But as I give you them, these are Romanized names. So if you're like, wait, Mr. Pierre, I've heard it, Mao, M-A-O, and then Zedong, like Z-H-E or T-S-E, and we're just grasping at straws. So I'm just saying for the test, no Mao. Mao is Chairman Mao. He is the guy who was the leader of really the first Communist Party within China and was the first General Secretary of the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, and really turned what we now know as Communist China, the People's Republic of China, under his rule. If you ever go there and visit, there are certain spots in Beijing, Red Square, all that stuff, that you'll see his image and visage in a lot of different places. Similar to a George Washington figure, if you will, for China. So, anywho, that's Mao. Make sure you guys write him down. Controversial figure. Like a lot of our own historical figures in the U.S., he's a controversial figure. But Mao is the first leader of the communist China. We'll say it that way. Okay, there are other leaders, but the next guy, when Mao dies, the next guy who steps up in the late 70s, early 80s, who is instrumental He was actually leader of the military, who rose to power that way. So he wasn't just like a political leader, he was more the military leader, and then rose through that. Okay, he is Deng Xiaoping. So how would I write that? D-E-N-G. And you can say, like, it's Deng. Like, you can. I've heard it pronounced more like Deng. But D-E-N-G, Xiaoping, Xiaoping. Okay? He's the next leader that you guys should know. And he was important because, I'll say it this way. He saved China from itself. Okay? He was a leader that was good economically for the country. He saved the country from itself because they were going to devolve into just sort of, oh my gosh, chaos. I think Mao, toward the end of his life, there were some economic problems within China, economic problems within communism, and Deng Xiaoping changed it to where that's why we have now, well, China is this economic powerhouse. How did that go? A lot of it was because of him. So he saved China from itself. Also a controversial leader, but economically good. Okay, talk about controversy. This is the next one. Tank Man. Tank Man. That's the next name to write down. Not a leader, but an important event. Tank Man. And for 5,000 points, Leo, I think you know, this incident was called, ding, 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 Tiananmen Square incident. The Tiananmen Square incident, which is in your notes. There were big protests, and that individual symbolically stood up against the leaders, against the communist military, and was never seen of again, whether in seclusion, hiding, killed, etc., don't know. And Tank Man was a symbol of protest. And so that's where, so on the test, if you were to say Tank Man or Tiananmen Square incident, any of that's good. And the final leader you'll write down is the current president of China, and this is Xi Jinping. So X-I Jinping, J-I-N-P-I-N-G. Now remember, in Asia, most Asian cultures have their names flipped. That shows, geez, proof in the pudding of more deference to family and importance of family and ancestry in terms of religion and tradition. But many of the names will be, rather, their family name is going to be first, and just their given name is going to be second. So in the U.S., you know, I'm Gordon Pierre. If I had been born in Asia, if you will, I'd be Pierre Gordon. Okay? So when we say Mao, we say Deng Xiaoping, we say Kim Jong-un, like in Korea. The family name is Kim, and his personal given name is Un, right? Excuse me. So those are the names: Mao, Deng Xiaoping, Tank Man, and Xi Jinping, who's the current president. You'll see the things changed over time, where the general secretary wasn't as important as a leader. I'm going to say it that way. Still important, but like to help maybe modernize their government, the importance of a president came to the forefront, because like many Western cultures were like, we need a president. Who's your president? We don't have a president. We have a general secretary. Well, we'll call our general secretary will be called a president. Xi Jinping wears both the hat of the general secretary of the party, and he's also wearing the hat as an elected president of the People's Republic of China. So while he has both hats, really his main power is by being the general secretary, but he does in name have it being president. So other heads of state will be able to call him like the president or heads of state. Okay, and you'll find out he's made it to where he's going to be a leader for a while too. Not just him, but the party. Okay. All right, let me make sure I'm not forgetting anything here. Okay. Yeah, Deng Xiaoping was head of the Central Military Commission, and okay. Now, let's shift under political unrest, under Tiananmen Square. There's going to be two main things you write down in this section. This is highly controversial because it's, again, if you have me for U.S. history, like for the U.S., we talk about the Trail of Tears. Woo, we talk about internment camps. Yikes. Things that are really blemishes on our own record. Slavery. I mean, we've got problems in the U.S. Some problems for China, like any other country, especially when you're a more visible country, it's easier to like focus on those flaws because It's human nature, I think. One of the things that our curriculum has that you should know is Tiananmen Square. The first thing is this 1989 crisis began as a quiet protest for the death of a liberal Chinese leader. This 1989 protest began as a quiet protest for the death of a liberal Chinese leader who was pushed out of the government by the conservative Politburo. Okay, this is like a Russian term, but Politburo, Politburo. We'll explain that in a second. Began as a quiet protest over the death of a liberal Chinese leader who was pushed out of government by the conservative Politburo. Keep writing the same part. It quickly changed to protests against the corrupt and authoritarian communist government. It quickly changed to protests against the corrupt and authoritarian communist government. Hundreds of thousands joined in protesting for close to 2 months. Hundreds of thousands joined in protesting for close to 2 months. Hundreds of thousands joined in protesting for close to 2 months. Okay, that's your first section. So it began as a quiet protest for the death of a liberal Chinese leader and who was pushed out by the conservative Politburo. It quickly changed to protests against the corrupt communist government, and hundreds of thousands joined the protest for 2 months. So just numerically, this is a massive group who's protesting. 1989, it's similar to another thing that's happening in the world history. That's right, Kayla, ding, 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 the fall of the Berlin Wall, right? So communism, as we alluded to in Russia, was sort of having its problems. You know, when you equalize pay, it takes away incentive for people to create or be ingenious, and so communism sort of fell, and corruption got involved too, because it's not survival of the fittest, it's survival of those who might play favorites, right? Those are the problems inherently within communism that they've had to change. So people felt in the world like this is it. Tiananmen Square is this huge, almost similar to Martin Luther King Jr. Reflection Mirror Lake type thing. Like, yeah, like this is that same moment where protests could happen. And there were correspondents over there from US, Australia, Europe. Everybody thought in this square like this is going to be where the government's going to sort of bend a bit and say, hey, we'll give you more democratic freedoms. As you'll see, China has given them economic freedoms. Deng Xiaoping allowed it to where you can buy things more and create more business, even though that doesn't sound communist. The government will still take stake in certain big businesses, but lower ones are all up to the people. That's not really even communism anymore. That's state capitalism. But the government angle of it, the political angle of it, and that ties in with your paper too on economic liberalization and political liberalization. But on the government side, the government does sort of a feng shui balancing of tightening and loosening, where they'll tighten on political things, no freedom of speech, freedom of press, and protest, but loosening at least on the issue of economics, right? So people can buy things. So that's where we're at in '89. People thought that this would be, oh, of course they're going to sort of bend and give more liberties and be even more loose on freedom of speech and protest and assembly. That was not the case. That was not the case at all. The second thing you're going to write down here is Deng, or Deng, D-E-N-G, gave the People's Liberation Army, their military, the license to kill and remove demonstrators by any means necessary. License to kill and remove demonstrators by any means necessary. Keep writing here. Thousands were killed on live TV, making it one of the worst human rights violations by China. So thousands were killed on TV, making it one of the worst human rights violations by China. Okay. So what does that mean here? There's a couple terms you might be a little foggy on. When I say Politburo from that first point, Politburo is basically their cabinet, if you will. And I don't ever like to liken it to religious analogies, but in Utah, I have seen it help students understand there is a first presidency, there's a quorum of the 12, there's a 70, and then other local authorities, right? Like, that's actually very similar to a lot of the communist structure, in which you'll have a standing committee, right? A couple people who are important, maybe a dozen, and you'll have a Politburo who's like, maybe 2 dozen, if that. And then you'll have a central committee and so forth. The Politburo was highly conservative, meaning they didn't want to change things. They didn't want to give more freedom. And this liberal Chinese leader who died, not because they killed him, he just died of natural causes. At the passing of him, people remembered, oh yeah, he talked about liberal ideas, meaning free ideas, freedom of speech and freedom of press. Remember, freedom is not easy, it's messy. It is messy because you give people choices, and then those choices, they inevitably will probably make bad choices and all those issues. So people remember, we want more maybe freedom to do these things. And the government was like, no, we don't want to do that. Hence the picture of Tank Man, where they, yes, authorized with Deng Xiaoping, who's head of the military, to have tanks. And they went in, a lot of people at night were purportedly killed because the government officials had AK-47s and were shooting those who were protesters. Now, they were warned, it was this weird tension, but the Chinese government needed them to get gone. They didn't want this protest to keep happening, so drastic measures were taken, and many died. It is a sticky subject, obviously, for the Chinese government because they weren't going to bend. They did the counter to Berlin Wall when that fell, and David Hasselhoff is singing, and freedom in the streets, because those in Germany really like David Hasselhoff. I don't know. But they really enjoyed that moment. Not the case in China. Okay, so be aware of that. Now, let's go to the next section, Tibet. Okay, that's one big paragraph we're going to write down here for Tibet. The first is, while Tibet is known as one of China's autonomous regions, that's A-U-T-O-N-O-M-O-U-S, autonomous regions, the Tibetans want more. It's known as one of the autonomous regions, meaning they have freedom, maybe more freedom than like Guangdong province or something. Like Tibet, that province is given some freedom, but they want more. Keep writing here. After the failed uprising in 1959, Tibet's spiritual leader, or what's Tibet's spiritual leader known as? Very popular in the world today. That's right, Ellie. It's the Dalai Lama. Okay? 2 words here, D-A-L-A-I space L-A-M-A. So after the failed uprising in 1959, Tibet's spiritual leader, the Dalai Lama, and all the other leaders had to flee to India. They had to flee to India. So Tibet's spiritual leaders, Dalai Lama, and everybody had to flee to India. I guess we'll pause there for a second. The Dalai Lama is, yes, you see a lot in the saffron robes, some of the darker red robes. This is a spiritual Buddhist leader. You hear of Buddhist monks in monasteries and like these hills and monastic cool areas. That's Tibet. The rolling mountain regions and monasteries there. That's Tibet. Visualize that, right? In a lot of movies and stuff we see there. Not Shaolin monks. That's something different. But they're religious, they're Buddhist, but we know under Chinese communist control, they're not really going to endorse any religion at all. And at times in their past, they've forbidden it. And so that's why in 59, they tried to have an uprising to get independence, and it failed. That meant if you swing at Goliath, you best not miss, sort of that saying. Because if you miss, they're coming for you. The moment it failed, the Dalai Lama and all the other Buddhist spiritual leaders for Tibet, they left. They fled to India. They then lived in France. And if any of them step back in soil in the PRC, that could be problematic. Tibet doesn't have full independence. But you want to keep writing here in the same thing that the international community wants Tibet to have independence so badly that in 2008, during the Olympic torch relay, the flame was extinguished. They want independence so badly that in 2008, the flame was extinguished. Okay, now you might think, that's weird. Why is 2008? I guess many of you were like 4 or 5 at that time. Does anybody know? Let's see, Mikkel, maybe? Why is 2008 so connected to Tibet? Ding, ding, ding. The Olympics were in Beijing. And so as the Olympics were in Beijing, protesters in France were trying to bring awareness to Tibet, this sort of forgotten area that maybe should get independence. It's a common thing you'll see in college, like free Tibet. It's one of those hip arguments to have, if you will. And the person who was the Olympic torch relay runner was tackled. The flame by these protesters was then extinguished, and they said, "Free Tibet!" Wow, that's really extreme. But they wanted to bring awareness to it because Buddhist monks, they're not going to be actually aggressive, fighting, terrorist, guerrilla warfare. They're not. In fact, you don't need to write it down, but many of the monks will self-immolate, meaning they'll burn themselves alive and die to help bring awareness, because they can't hurt other people, but they can't hurt themselves. Self-immolation is outlawed by the government, naturally, because that makes everybody look bad, and it's tricky. But international community wants Tibet to have independence. Hasn't happened. They have been given more freedoms, though. Okay, the next section, Jinzhong, and I've heard it pronounced that Jinzhong, is north of that on the western border of China still, right? So if you look at the map, Tibet is sort of southwest bordering Buddhist areas. You'll see Nepal, India, right? Like you'll see those areas. Himalayas, that type of range, if you will. And then you go a little more north, though, and you see an area of Jinzhong, which is going to be bordering like Turkmenistan. You have some Stan countries, meaning the flow and influence of Islam, right? So you see religious things, and being far away from the capital cities, this could be similar to Montana. Montana's like, at times people move there because they don't like the federal government. They want to be far away from them. That's a similar tension in the western part of China to eastern China. Okay, so the main thing you're going to write down here in Jinzhong is Jinzhong's inhabitants, who are also called Uyghurs. We spell it Uyghurs. Yeah, sort of different way to spell it. But Uyghurs, their inhabitants, which are called Uyghurs, are Muslims who want to create an independent Islamic state. They're Muslims who want to create an independent Islamic state. That alone, anybody who's like, well, why would the Chinese government be oppressive against them? Okay, like, be real. Think of the U.S. and own biases against any wording of independent Islamic state. Words of ISIS and Al-Qaeda and Hezbollah come in mind, and it's like, terrorist agencies. Xinjiang, the Uyghurs may not be terrorists at all, but there is a public perception problem when they want an independent Islamic state. So keep writing here. In 2009, protesters were assassinated, which only led to more chaos, with the Chinese government ordering the execution of Muslim protesters. 2009, protesters were assassinated, which only led to more chaos, with the Chinese government ordering the execution of Muslim protesters. Okay, so let's break that down. The story goes, and these are purported allegedly. It's so hard because the U.S. will be biased in our own media and how we represent things, and Chinese government's no different. They're going to be biased in how they represent things. So it's hard to figure what's real, what's not. But the story purportedly goes that there was a government official from China visiting in Jinzhong, and there was a hit and run. There was somebody who was killed by just a hit and run by a Chinese diplomat and official. Protesters then in 2009 were protesting, saying the government should be held accountable for that. Whether that actually happened or didn't, but protesters were there. Then apparently those protesters were assassinated by purportedly government officials, which only led to more chaos, because in Jinzhong there wasn't this pacifist way that was found in Tibet. So they were fighting and pushing, and it goes from bad to worse. You want to keep writing here that during the crisis, the government shut down the internet and phone service to prevent news from spreading. The government shut down phone and news service, or internet and phone service, to prevent news from spreading. So when more unrest was happening after those protesters were dealt with, they then had to sort of cut the phone line, so to speak, internet multi-communication blackout. And that was controversial. After the blackout was rescinded, official accounts are that we had to arrest some of the people who were involved and who were disturbing the public peace, and other reports were saying no, there were hundreds killed unfairly by the government, and that's the concern. So as I'm telling you these different stories, be aware of examples, hint for the test. Like we have for Nigeria and Iran, there's good and bad with democracy, right? For China and Russia, there's going to be issues of ways that they have increased. Sorry, I say this. Ways that they've increased economic ties, and ways that they have also controlled people, right? So there's this there's a give and a take. So I want you to be thinking of hint like Jinzhong controlling people, Tiananmen Square controlling people. Economic ties under Deng Xiaoping open up to trade with the West, right? There's sort of this give and take. Okay, the last section you're going to do here. Well, no, let's stop there for today. Yeah, because we're going to get to neighbors at Hong Kong and Taiwan, and we'll get to that next time. But I hope that helps in terms of general feedback for the assignment that was just handed out, or that you turned in. We had a lot of people who were turning things in late, and I'll be docking points, all that stuff. But in terms of this, all in all, people did quite well. When I said I was delightfully surprised, there were a couple of you who went above and beyond for great scripts, great videos. I love it. The one thing that got people tripped up, and if you see feedback of I didn't get full credit, and it says unclear definitions, what does that mean? It's tying into economic liberalization and political liberalization. That's the main thing people were tripped up on. Economic liberalization and political liberalization. Meaning, economic liberalization is the idea of making the economy more free. You can buy and purchase things. It's more capitalist, stock market. You own your own business. You keep your profits. You succeed or fail on your own. That's economic liberalization. Some of you just didn't get the right definition there and messed up on that. And the other thing that could have been a problem is political liberalization, which was to make things more free, where you can vote, freedom of assembly, press, all those things. You may have gotten the definition wrong there. That's really it. So if I said unclear definitions, that's what I'm referring to. So I hope that helps, and I hope that you know that for future assignments. All right, I hope you have a good day. We'll see you. I'll do an upload for World Civ on Monday. Awesome. Bye.